Hello friends, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, back with another mixed media-ish style card using the Simon Says Stamp thank you text background stamp again. I'm kind of obsessed with it lately. So this time I'm inking it up with Simon's Fog ink, just a very light gray ink. This is kind of one of my mainstays in my ink collection. So I had the background stamp face up, inked it up with the fog ink, and then I'm pressing the smooth side of some Canson XL watercolor paper into it. And I purposely went with this fog ink because it's not water reactive. I mentioned that in a recent video as well, although I need to experiment with that, like maybe stamping some backgrounds with water reactive ink and then doing the ink smushing and just seeing what happens. Why not? So anyway, for once I was actually thinking a little bit ahead. While I had the stamp out and the ink, I masked off at the score line of my card base and then inked up the stamp again with that fog ink and then stamped it on the inside of what will be my card base. Because again, it's just a nice light gray ink. It just gives it that little extra something. So I've pulled out my craft mat and 3 of the lightest colors of some of Simon's Pawsitively saturated inks. I've used these inks a lot for like stamping and ink blending, but I'm just starting to experiment with them more, like doing things like this, like with ink smushing and that, because these are very water reactive and yet they're different. Like if you compare them to distress inks, they're just different. I can't really explain it. I just notice how they look when the water sprayed on them, and yet, you know, there's nothing wrong with either one. I love my distress inks. I am loving these inks. And the more options and the more colors make me happy. So anyway, I went with these 3 really light colors, which is not usually my norm. I usually go for, you know, brighter and rainbow and all that stuff. But this was just the mood I was in. So I'm using Celery, Lemonade, and SEAFOAM. And standard ink smushing procedure, you know, you mush the inks onto the nonstick craft sheet, spray it with water, and then you just start pressing the watercolor paper into it. And I just keep adding layers and drawing in between. So then I get this like splotchy, gorgeous background, which I ended up adding more of the SEAFOAM. It's just the prettiest pale aqua color. So that I smushed and just splattered onto the background with a paintbrush. Again, dried that really well. And then I'm going to add some white gouache as well, because I'm just having fun with it. And I'm glad I stamped that background with the fog ink. It's very subtle. That's literally what I was going for. Sometimes things just don't turn out, you know, the way they are in your head, but this time it did, and I was quite happy. So, splattered the white gouache, let that completely dry. And then I'm trimming this down because you can't probably tell it all on camera, but I did stamp the background a little bit crooked, not the end of the world, but I was planning on cutting this down anyway. So I just kind of lined up the stamp lines with my paper trimmer and then trimmed this down to be smaller than my A2 card front. So once this was trimmed down, I pulled out this Geo Leaves stencil. This came out whenever, actually, I think it came on the same release with that background stamp last year sometime. I don't know. Anyway, I really like this pattern. I like how it kind of, I don't want to say flutters away, but because I'm thinking butterflies, that's of course what I used on this card. But I like how the pattern is on this. So I used crackle paste again on top of this background, because that's another thing I'm just back into being obsessed with lately, is crackle paste on all the things. So I applied that over the stencil on this background, and then removed any little bits that were kind of hanging too much over the edge, and then set that aside to dry, washed my stencil, washed my palette knife. And then I grabbed just a scrap of the same watercolor paper and that SEAFOAM ink, and I'm just going to do the same thing, like just ink smushing with this one color and just adding some layers to get texture. This is, well, even the color combo, this is very Debbie Hughes inspired. She does such gorgeous, like subtle, soft colors, and I'm just like, oh, because that's not my jam, you know. I usually go for, and I'm not even kidding, I had insanely bright colors picked out for this originally, but I wasn't feeling it. So anyway, she also does this and then die cuts it, and I love how you get that just textured look versus just die cutting and, you know, ink blending or using solid cardstock. So I just kept adding layers of that same ink and just drying in between. So I've got all this texture going on, you know, deeper and lighter colors, all done with just one ink pad. So I kept adding to it, smushed the ink pad, added splatter with my paintbrush to get even more, you know, texture to it. And then once I was happy with it and it's completely dry, I'm going to die cut this with the Etched Butterfly Wafer die. Another favorite. This one is newer. This came out, I think, in December. But in my last video, or the previous video, I'd used the Etched Dragonfly. That is one of my faves. So this butterfly is also fabulous. So I'll get to that in a second. So I die cut the wings from that, and then I had to add splatter to my background. This time I went with silver. You guys see me use the Zig Gold liquid like all the time in all my videos because I'm obsessed with it. I don't reach for silver very often, but I thought it would look really pretty with this card. So I used the silver to splatter this background. And then I also just used the excess, because, you know, it's all over my craft sheet, to paint the body of the butterfly that I had die cut so that it gives it just this pretty silver sheen. And then I'm just going to glue the wings together because the wafer die cuts like the top portion of the wings and the bottom portion separate. So I'm just going to lightly glue those together. And then I'll add a little bit of adhesive to the back of the body of this butterfly, making sure like it was dry by this point. And then I'll adhere that on top, and I've got my little butterfly with all that texture going on. So once I did that, off camera, I had die cut the Big Friend wafer die. Again, this is an oldie but goodie favorite. So I die cut that from white cardstock and stacked a few layers. And then the top layer is Simon's Silver matte silver mirror cardstock. Beautiful. So I had done that. And then my other sentiments are from the new Friend Greetings set. So I stamped one little sentiment just onto a scrap of white cardstock using that SEAFOAM ink. And then on the inside of the card, I'm stamping another sentiment from that same set with the SEAFOAM ink. And this time I'm using my Misty for that because I want to stamp it a couple times because this is a very just pale aqua color. So I inked that up, stamped it twice. And then my little tiny sentiment strip, I don't even know if you guys can see it on camera, like what it says, but it says thinking of you. So I've got all my elements now so I can start adhering them. So that Big Friend word, there is an outline for this wafer die as well that comes with it. But I used just the word for this card and applied adhesive to the back of it. And I'm gluing that to my card front. And obviously like the crackle paste is dry by this point. The splatter is dry. So adhered my sentiment, and then the little dot to the eye, I have all the little die cut pieces because I had figured this out whenever it was. And I've said this before in videos too. I wish I'd figured this out years and years ago, you know, fiddling with these tiny little die cuts. And oh man, the amount of times you drop them on the floor and they disappear. But yeah, stacking them in place and adhering them like I just showed. So much easier. And if you don't want to do that, skip it and use a little like gem or rhinestone, you know, it's just fine. So adhere that into place. And then for the butterfly, I put some of Simon's Big Mama foam tape behind the wings. And this foam tape is not as thick as standard foam tape. So it's going to give it a little bit of dimension. If you wanted to give the wings even more dimension, you could use thicker foam tape or double up the layers. But I just wanted a little bit. So I've got the foam tape behind the wings, and then I'm just going to use some craft tacky glue behind the body, and I'll bend that a bit so the body is adhered flat to the card front, but then the wings are popped up just that little bit to give it that just a small amount of dimension. And then that little sentiment strip, I'm going to adhere that with one of my Doris foam strips. So it'll say, you know, friend and then thinking of you. Again, subtle. I don't know. Like I said, I've said this many times. I'm kind of shocked at myself, like going for these more like soft colors, but they are very pretty together. They really are. So anyway, after I got everything adhered, I covered the back of this panel with the Big Mama foam tape because it is my favorite. And I always like, for those that aren't aware, even like if you've watched my videos, like I've been using this stuff for years. They call it Big Mama because the roll itself is just massive, like huge. Lasts a really long time. I make a ton of cards, so I go through a fair bit of it, but even then, these rolls last forever. So anyway, coated the back of the panel with that, pop that onto my card front. You could always stop here, but of course I'm going to add bling because I have several lifetimes of it. And as I was going through my bling stash, I was like, ooh, I have these are Hint of Mint jelly drop hearts from Trinity Stamps. They're fabulous, and they're just the perfect color for this, and they're hearts, and just love, love, love. So I have those, and then I had some like aquamarine ripple. I love the names of them. Gemstones, and then some silver satin baubles. So everything just went perfectly with this card. So I kind of sprinkled those throughout the card front, and then I'm going to adhere them into place with dabs of craft tacky glue, and then just press those into place, let the glue dry, and this card is complete. But then I'm also going to pair this card with one of Simon's Sea Glass metallic envelopes just to continue the shimmer. And then I always try to show the like crackle and everything, all the detail in the video, but I swear my camera doesn't really pick it up. But the photos, you can see just the crackle and whatnot, and the texture created in the background, and it's just fun. And then here and there, you know, that text that I'd stamped just kind of peeks through. Super fun. So hope you guys enjoyed this. As always, I will have a link below my video to my blog post. I'll have the pictures in my blog post, picture links to everything, the supply list, all that will be in the description box below if you guys are interested. Thank you all so much for watching, for subscribing, thumbs upping, commenting, all of it. I very much appreciate it. And I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye.